So Donald Trump's campaign just released a new ad going up against Nancy Pelosi. And guys, it is a really devastating ad. So we're going to take a look at it, and then we're going to come back and talk specifically about why it's such a devastating ad, and then also what Democrats can do if they want to be able to respond to attacks like this in the future. So let's take a look, then we'll be back to talk about it.
We turn now to that $350 billion fund to help small businesses and its workers get through the shutdown.
It will be up to Congress to restock it.
But Democrats blocking that move this morning.
They asked for $250 billion in 48 hours. I said, well, I don't think so. They objected, and I congratulate the Senate Democrats.
Speaker Pelosi, what are you going to share with us from your home?
Chocolate candy.
Thousands have been forced to wait for hours at food banks all across the country.
This is
Oh my.
chocolate, and then we have some other chocolate here. We just got to restock the ice cream.
You don't want to eat up everything all at one time.
I can't do it much longer. I'm trying so hard.
We were, shall we say, enjoying.
Having to admit that, yeah, we're starving, and
I like it better than anything else.
Taping this segment, there are 22 million people out of work.
This specific program is about stopping job losses today.
This is hurting people bad.
Other people in our family look for some other flavors, but
Right now, it's survival mode. You don't know where that next something else is going to come from.
I don't know what I would have done if ice cream were not invented. I just wonder.
Yeah, so that is one of the most devastating ads that I've seen in a long time. One of the most savage ads that I've ever seen in a long time. Let them eat ice cream. But guys, this is an important ad to pay attention to, not just because of, the political theater of it. Not just because, oh, well, I don't like Nancy Pelosi, therefore looking at Nancy Pelosi getting roasted, that was entertaining for me to watch. It's also really important to pay attention to because I think that it highlights one of the weaknesses of the Democratic Party, which is that a lot of Americans have come to see the Democratic Party as being really out of touch. And guys, you guys know I'm on the left. You guys know I'm a progressive. You guys know I don't want to see, personally, I don't want to see Republicans sweep the House. I don't want to see the Republicans sweep the Senate. Well, they already control the Senate, but I don't want to see them taking more and more control over this country. I don't think that that would be a particularly good thing, but it's one of the major weaknesses that we are seeing in the Democratic Party. I mean, we saw this coming out from Matt Yglesias here. You can see, are people pretending to be mad at Nancy Pelosi for liking ice cream? Guys, I wasn't mad when I tweeted about this, when other people were talking about this, at least the ones on the left talking about this. They weren't mad. We weren't mad because Nancy Pelosi had ice cream. We weren't necessarily mad even because she had expensive ice cream. We were mad at her for her lack of political skills. We were upset at her for just showing how oblivious she was to just how out of touch she seemed, she looked like she didn't have any idea that we were going through we are in the middle of a pandemic. It was so out of touch, so brazen of her to do something like this. But the crazy part is, guys, if you actually look here, so this is Nancy Pelosi's Twitter. Here she is bragging about this. I mean, you can see right here, she's over here bragging about this. She talked about this on Twitter. Why? Because she thinks that she's being relatable. She thinks that, oh, by showing everybody my freezer, showing everybody my ice cream, people are going to see this and people are going to like it. People are going to see this and they're going to be able to relate to this. She thinks she's being relatable. Guys, this is not relatable content. For most Americans out there, we're really struggling right now. This is a pandemic. A lot of people, 22 million people losing their jobs, millions and millions of people losing their jobs. I mean, you heard it in that ad. They talked about it there. We've seen food lines. We've seen food banks being completely run out of food. We are seeing so many people hungry while Nancy Pelosi's out here bragging about her ice cream in front of $24,000 freezers. Guys, that is not relatable content. But the problem here that I think that is the important part is that the Democratic Party has been intentionally trying to be relatable to upper middle class suburban Americans. Upper middle class and Wall Street crowd making what is, in my opinion, a devil's pact with wealthy individuals so that then they won't be able to turn around and fight for the economic issues, right? Because here's the situation that they're in right now. Union membership has been declining for a long-term time. Union membership has been declining, and union white working class individuals tend to vote Democrat. And so as a result, Democratic, so they need to make it up as how they see it. And so the only way they think that they can make up that gain is to try to encroach in on upper middle class and wealthier individuals. But the problem with that is it's a devil's pact. You can't have an alliance with rich people and think that you're going to be able to take on the rich. You can't do it. That's not how it works. If you actually have principles and you actually want to stand up for your values, something that you cannot do, something that you must not do, is try to intentionally go after wealthy individuals by appealing to their own interests. That's not going to work. That's not how you actually form a working class coalition, which is going to be able to fight against moneyed interests. You can't do it. You just can't do it. I know I'm getting worked up here, and I try not to be super dramatic or whatever in my videos, but this is something that really, really upsets me. I've seen it in my own home state of Virginia, right? In our state Senate, in our state House, we recently swept, the Democrats swept, but we took it over using upper middle class suburban areas in Northern Virginia. And look, I live in Northern Virginia, guys, but Northern Virginia, you need to understand, is one of the wealthiest places in the country, one of the wealthiest places in the world, even. And, now that the Democrats are in power, they can't even bring to a vote many of the union legislation that when they were in the minority, they supported. They can't even bring these things to a vote anymore because now their hands are held and tied behind their own back by the people who brought them into power. And so now they don't have power for anything. Now their power that they have is useless. It doesn't mean anything. It infuriates me. Anyway, so what I want to talk to you guys about here is that, in general, when it comes to the working class, guys, there's been two kinds of analysis, right? There's been two kinds of analysis to explain what, sort of rising inequality and to explain some of the issues that's been going on, right? There's a kind of identitarian analysis and there's a kind of populist analysis. On the identitarian analysis, people argue, these are two different sort of scholarly accounts for why there's been rising inequality. There's others, but two general kinds of accounts. There's an identitarian analysis, which argues that the white working class has left the Democratic Party, at least in the case of the United States. There's other accounts which sort of, bring this analysis to other countries. But in the case of the United States, that the white working class left the Democratic Party because they started to realize that, they had a kind of racial resentment as they began to realize that minorities and other poor individual, minorities tend to be more poor. And so minority individuals, were sort of the primary beneficiaries of social programs. And so because of racial resentment, left the Democratic Party. The other kind of analysis, the populist analysis, argues that the Democratic Party got caught up in, a kind of capitalist affairs, caught up by the temptations of capitalism, the temptations of global capitalism, and then they thought they could earn more money, sort of the capitalists thought that they could earn more money by going overseas, shipping everybody's jobs overseas, and then basically abandon the working class. So in other words, the difference between the identitarian analysis and the populist analysis is that in the identitarian analysis, the white working class left the Democratic Party. In the populist analysis, the elites left the working class, right? So there's a difference, right? Did the working class leave the party or did the party leave the working class? That's kind of the, if you want to look at it kind of abstractly, that's one of the major differences between those two analyses. Now, I'm not here to say that there's only a one or the other answer because I've read literature on both sides of the debate. And there is legitimate empirical evidence for both sides. So it's not like it's entirely one or the other. Both factors played a role just factually if you look at it objectively. However, I am going to argue more so for the populist side because if you look here at this graph, let me make it bigger for you so you can see it. Actually, this isn't quite a graph. I'll show you a graph in a minute. But you can see here, this is basically union membership since 1964 down here at the bottom. And we're going to slide it and you're going to see basically most states, not including like South Carolina, but most states had pretty high union membership. But then as you slide this through the years, you can see it becoming more and more basically fewer and fewer people are joining in a union. You can see generally, though not entirely, there is a general overlap between Republican states historically, and lack of union membership. Not a perfect overlap, but it's there, right? And you can see right here, general union decline since like basically 1983. You can see this is a decline in union membership from 1983 to 2015. Now, the reason, by the way, why a lot of the research when it comes to union membership starts in the 80s is because that's when some of the records for union stuff started keeping better track of that stuff. And also the narrative started taking hold around that time that union membership was in decline because Ronald Reagan broke the airline. I think it was the airline strike I know it was August 5th. I think it was 1981. Ronald Reagan broke the airline strike. And in most history books, that's generally looked at as the moment when we start telling the story of declining union power. But in reality, I mean, you just saw there when we were looking at the numbers from starting in the 1960s, we saw there that the union membership was already declining before then. So if you ask me, I actually think part of the reason why Ronald Reagan was able to break that strike in 1981 was because union membership had already declined, and so unions' bargaining power wasn't quite as strong as it might have been, just a few decades earlier. Whereas a few decades earlier, Ronald Reagan very well may not have even been able to break the union strike at all. Right. So anyway, what I'm trying to say here is that some of this is a just necessary byproduct of, some of the stuff that's going on because of capitalism, right? So capitalism led to a situation where it became so tempting to go overseas. We could just make a ton more money by, sending our factories overseas and then having people, the wealthy capitalists live here and then make a ton more money. And so that led to a situation where then unions began to decline and the Democratic Party got weaker. Guys, we all like when I say we're making more and more of a devil's pact, in some sense that's misleading, because we already made the devil's pact. Years and years and years, decades and decades ago, before I was born, the Democratic Party made the devil's pact, saying, "Oh, well, we're interested in free trade. We're interested in multinational multinational free trade, no limitations. We're just gonna, have factories everywhere," right? And that led to a situation where, of course, the Democratic Party became weaker and weaker and weaker, and then now needs to, or at least it sees itself as being needing to, go into wealthier areas, wealthier and wealthier and wealthier areas, in order to be able to keep winning votes. Guys, when I was growing up, they always told us that the Democratic Party was going to be ascendant because there was going to be a coalition of young voters, a coalition of minorities, a coalition of working class, and that then the Republicans were just going to be vanquished. We were going to vanquish the Republicans. That was what I was always told growing up. Guys, that is not coming true, specifically because of the fact that the Democrats just took everyone's vote for granted. And I mean, we just saw when it came to the primaries, when it came to Bernie Sanders, what happened. The Democratic Party worked together collectively to stop Bernie Sanders, who, by the way, if you looked at it from like a time period of the 1960s or the 1950s, especially 1950s, 1960s in Europe, Bernie Sanders would have been like a moderate social democrat, right? Whereas here in America at this time in 2020, Bernie Sanders was somehow seen as a radical, and the wealthy donors just couldn't tolerate him, so they had to get together to stop Bernie Sanders. Because if it had just played out, if the Democratic primary had just played out naturally, Bernie Sanders would have won. But no, couldn't do that. What we had to do was work together, get everybody to drop out at the same time, and all endorse Joe Biden at one single time in order to stop Bernie Sanders. That was what had to be done. Why? Because the Democratic Party made a devil's pact with these rich people in order to keep winning power, because they realized, oh my gosh, unions are in decline because of the decisions that they already made. And it just makes me so mad. And so to come here and see Nancy Pelosi bragging about all of her ice cream while people are hungry, while people are starving, just goes to show you how the Democratic Party just looks so out of touch to most of America. Most of America does not see themselves. Most of America is not in that situation that Nancy Pelosi is in, where she's a multi-millionaire. Right? Most Americans out there, the majority of you watching this video, like if you're watching this video, most likely you don't have a $5 million plus net worth, right? If you do, you can let me know, and you can share some with me, right? But just kidding. But seriously, like my point here is this, that like the vast majority of Americans look at what Nancy Pelosi is doing there and they can't relate. They don't relate. But Nancy Pelosi thinks she's being relatable. And in some sense, that's true, because being relatable is always dependent on who you're trying to relate to. And who is Nancy Pelosi trying to relate to? She's trying to relate to the upper middle class, to the Wall Street crowd, who, yes, during this time of a pandemic, yeah, they're disappointed. They can't go out. They can't go to the same places, but they're at home. Their fridges are stocked. They're perfectly fine. They're working from Zoom. I mean, that's exactly who she's trying to appeal to in some sense. And it makes me really, really upset, because it's really a devil's pact. That's what it is. It's a devil's pact. So anyway, that's just sort of my 2 cents on some of this stuff. So if you like the video, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thanks.